Thank you. Hi, everybody. And obviously this week we are beginning the second Chumash of the Torah. And there's an interesting point that you see from the Gaonim. You know, every Chumash has a nickname besides its regular name. So Chumash Breitowitz is called Sefer HaYashor, the Book of the Upright, because Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. Chumash Shemos I'll get to in a moment. Chumash Vayikra is called Toras Kohanim, the laws of the Kohanim. In fact, Leviticus actually means the law of the Levi. Bamidbar is called Chumash HaPikudim, the book of numbers, the book of census. And Devarim is called Mishneh Torah, the repetition of the law, which is actually Deuteronomy. So it's interesting that the English, or technically the Greek names, actually match up Chazal's nickname for each of the Chumashim, except for Genesis. So what is Shemos called? So the Nitziv brings from the Gaonim that the great name that Shemos is given is Chumash Hasheni, the second Chumash. That's not much of a name. I mean, basically Exodus would have been much more logical. And the Nitziv explains that that's because the essence of Sefer Shemos is a hashlama, it is a completion of creation. The creation story starts off with the creation of the world and then the individual personalities of the Jewish people. And the book of Shemos is the creation of the Jewish people as a national entity by essentially three formative experiences. The first was the exodus of Egypt, from Egypt. That made us free, but it made us servants of God, because God was the one who liberated us. The second is Matan Torah, which gave us our manual for instruction, our mission statements. And the third is the Hakamat HaMishkan, the establishment of the Mishkan, which in a sense meant that God's presence was with us. And since the very purpose of creation was that there should be a Jewish people that accepted God's Torah, so consequently the most fitting title for the book of Shemot would be Chumash Hasheni. It is part 2 of Genesis. It is the completion of the creation story. But I want to focus on perhaps a relatively small question, but I think it can be a key to a very important idea. And that is, we read at the end of Chumash Breitowitz that when Yaakov was dying after spending 17 years in Mitzrayim, he made his son Yosef swear that he would not be buried in Mitzrayim, and that his body should be taken back to Eretz Yisrael to be buried in the Marat HaMachpelah. And Yosef made that oath, and indeed, in a very poignant moment, all of the Bnei Yaakov went to Eretz Yisrael. They left Mitzrayim. They left Mitzrayim to go to Eretz Yisrael, knowing they would have to go back, meaning it reminds me very much, I keep on thinking in my mind a mental image of the great Rabbi Chanan Wasserman, who left Europe to come to the United States in 1938 in order to raise money for his yeshiva in Poland. And at that time it was fairly well known that the Nazis were going to invade Poland, which they did in September 1939, right before Rosh Hashanah. And it was also well known what the Nazis were going to do to their Jewish populations. And Rabbi Chanan was given many, many opportunities to stay in the United States. He was offered rabbinical positions. He was offered positions in the few yeshivos that were here. They would have been very honored to have him. But he made a decision that he could not abandon his Talmidim who were stuck in Europe. So he went back knowing that short of a miracle, he was going back to his death. And there's a very haunting picture of him on the ship going back to Europe. Maybe I'm reading too much into it, but he's staring out at the ocean. And I just can't help but think that he knew where he was going to. And of course, Rabbi Chanan Wasserman did die a martyr's death, Al Kiddush Hashem, in the Kovna ghetto. I believe it was 1941. So there's something similar in this type of scene in which the Jewish people are well aware that a slavery is going to begin, because God had told Abraham that your children will be enslaved in a land that's not theirs. So they realize there's some repercussion of being in Mitzrayim. And they're given this chance to go to Eretz Yisrael, but then they have to go back. And I wonder what is in their mind as they are going back. Do they have any type of inkling of what is awaiting them? What type of life they're going to have? The fate of their children, their grandchildren? As I say, given the fact that this was a nevuah already told to Abraham, they must have had some sense of it. Of course, you might just ask the simple question, why didn't they just stay? They're out of Egypt, let them stay. Well, first of all, keep in mind that Paro took hostages, as all repressive regimes do. The young children were left behind. I assume some of the wives were left behind as well. So these were hostages guaranteeing the return. Also, the Chumash tells us that there was a heavy armed guard from Mitzrayim that was accompanying this whole procession. Granted, you might think it was just to provide security for the Jewish people, but in effect there were also the guards that would make sure that the Jews would go back. Be it as it may, though, Yaakov is buried in Mitzrayim, and Yosef himself, in Eretz Yisrael, and Yosef himself returns to Eretz Yisrael to bury his father. Then he goes back. Now, in the beginning of Shemos, at the very end of Bereshis, Yosef similarly makes his brothers swear that when God remembers you, Pakod Yivkod Elokim Eschem, when God remembers you and you leave this land, take my bones with you. And we know that for the 40 years that the Jewish people wandered in the desert, Moshe Rabbeinu was the primary custodian of the Atzmot Yosef. So my question is a very simple question. Why didn't Yosef have the same type of arrangement as Yaakov? Yaakov died. They buried him in Eretz Yisrael immediately. Yosef, on the other hand, did not say, bury me right away. Yosef said, when God finally redeems you, take my body back with you. Why couldn't Yosef stipulate he wanted to be buried right then? Now, one simple answer might be that only Yosef had the clout to basically get kind of a temporary dispensation to leave Mitzrayim. So when Yaakov dies, Yosef is still the Mishnah L'Melech, so Yosef could waive the passport and visa restrictions, and Yosef can basically say, let him go, and Paro listens to Yosef. When Yosef dies, there is no figure, there is no comparable figure that has the authority to make this extraordinary request. And Yosef knows that after he's dead, his influence is gone. So as a result, this is Lefi Pshat, the best Yosef could say is, hey, listen, I know that I'm going to be stuck with you in Mitzrayim for all of these years, but God will eventually redeem you, and when he redeems you, take me back as well. Right? That could be Lefi Pshat. But I want to suggest there might be a much, much deeper reason why it was part of Yosef's destiny and part of Yosef's intention that he remain, even in a physical sense, with his brethren in Mitzrayim as they undergo slavery. And for this I have to go back a little bit, back to Bereshis. Right? It's hard to leave Bereshis. There's so many themes that are so rich there. But one of the great questions that the Meforshim have always pondered was the very strange, bizarre behavior that Yosef exhibits towards his brothers in those encounters. Right? The brothers come during a time of famine. They don't recognize Yosef. Yosef recognizes them. And Yosef accuses them of being spies. And even though he heard the story how there's one remaining son, Binyamin, his brother, and taking that son away from Yaakov would cause great pain and suffering, Yosef demands that his brothers bring Binyamin, knowing how much this would hurt Yaakov. And not only that, but once Binyamin is brought, he frames Binyamin by placing his goblet in Binyamin's sack. And what is that all about? Even if you were to assume, which is generally not Chazal's assumption, that Yosef was justifiably angry, upset, he wanted vengeance, he wanted to afflict pain on his brothers. But surely Binyamin was not involved in his sale at all. So in what way would it make any sense for Yosef to hurl false accusations against Binyamin? What's the point? And of course he's also hurting Yaakov. Although with respect to that question, let me just mention a little side point, which is not the main thing I want to talk about. One of the other questions people ask was that Yosef was separated from Yaakov for 22 years, from the age of 17 to the age of 39. Why did Yosef apparently make no attempt to contact his father throughout that entire period? Now there are different interpretations that are given. Some say that Yosef didn't have the opportunity, at least, well, now that may be so when he was a slave or in prison, but certainly as Mishnah Lamelech, he had opportunity. But some say at that point it would have been politically dangerous. Perhaps he would be endangering his position by being accused of collaborating with a foreign power. Although there actually was no centralized government in Canaan anyway, but that might have been the accusation. But one of the modern commentators, I think one of the teachers at Gush, in Herzog College, says a very striking, I think it may be Rev Ben Nun, says a very striking interpretation that Yosef thought for those 22 years that Yaakov himself had betrayed him. Because Yaakov sent Yosef to his brothers to seek out their welfare, and Yosef shows up and the brothers strip him and they throw him into they want to kill him initially, then they throw him into a pit and then they sell him. Yosef actually thinks, perhaps, that his father for some reason had also rejected him. Now that makes the experience so much more painful, that Yosef literally thought he was alone in the world because his mother had died, Rachel had died giving birth to Binyamin, his brothers had turned against him, and most painful of all, perhaps Yaakov himself had betrayed him and hated him, because perhaps Yosef thought because of the pirud that Yosef was introducing between Yaakov and his other sons by giving them the Lashon Hara. Now I'm not sure if Chazal would accept that interpretation, because if you recall, Chazal make the point that what stopped Yosef from sinning with Potiphar's wife, even though she was tempting him over and over and over and over again, was the image of his father appeared before his eyes. If he thought, I'm not sure, but it seems that if he thought that his father hated him, his father betrayed him, he wouldn't necessarily be using his father as his role model, but maybe not. Maybe the idea was he still recognized his father was righteous and holy, and whatever reason the father rejected. Again, it's a very, very powerful speculation. I have to call it only a speculation because there is no makor in the Torah for that type of idea. But that's an interesting point of why Yosef did not contact Yaakov. But be it as it may, let's now look at the behavior with the children. So there are two basic approaches that try to explain Yosef's behavior with his brothers. The first is the approach of the Rambam, a very, very famous approach. When Yosef was 17 years old, Yosef had certain dreams of grandeur. The sun and the moon and the 11 stars would bow down to him. Then the 11 sheaves of grain would bow down to his sheaf of grain. Yosef saw these dreams as prophecies, which indeed they were. Yosef saw this as a divine mission, that he would be a melech, he would be a sovereign over his brothers, as indeed he became. So the Ramban says, Yosef felt it was imperative that he do whatever he can to ensure the fulfillment of those dreams. Now, when 10 brothers come to buy grain and they bow down to him, a lot of the dream was fulfilled. 10 brothers bow down to him, Baruch Hashem. But 10 is not 11. There have to be 11. Now, if Yosef reveals himself and then Binyamin comes down looking at Yosef as a long-lost brother, that's not the same as acknowledging him as king. Right? I know now in England now with Harry and whatever her name is, Meghan, There's a whole issue now of how to deal with the royal family, But Harry, doesn't treat William as a king necessarily. It's a brother. So Yosef could not reveal himself until Binyamin comes down and bows down as well. But even that's not enough, because you got the 11 stars, but you need the son, you need the father. So the Ramban actually says, Yosef framed Binyamin in the hope that Yaakov himself would come down and beg for Binyamin's life. And that would have been, presumably with his wife Bilhah, that would have been the fulfillment of the Chalom. But what happened was, Yosef broke down prematurely because of Yehuda's speech that he's willing to give his life instead of Binyamin. Which means, according to Ramban, Yosef's plan was never fully carried out because he revealed himself earlier than he wanted to reveal himself. Now, it's true, it does say that Yaakov bowed down to Yosef even after Yosef revealed himself, so the dream was ultimately fulfilled, but Yosef's own plan was that this should happen before he revealed himself. Right, so this is the Shitas HaRamban, that all of Yosef's behaviors were an attempt to ensure a fulfillment of his chalomos, which he saw as a divine mission. Indeed, it was a divine mission. That was Yosef's destiny. The Abarbanel raises many, many questions on the Ramban's approach. Again, a little biographical detail about the Abarbanel. He was Don Yitzchak Abarbanel, so he actually was a titled member of the Spanish aristocracy. He was the finance minister of Spain during the reign of Ferdinand and Isabella of Columbus fame, and indeed the Abarbanel raised the financing for Columbus's mission, which eventually resulted in the discovery of the New World, and the like. And this was also during the time of the Spanish Inquisition, and this was when Ferdinand and Isabella, under the influence of Torquemada, issued a decree that Jews either have to convert to Christianity or be expelled or suffer the consequences of being burnt at the stake. There were Jews who converted openly but continued to practice Judaism in private. They are known as the Marranos, although Marranos is actually an offensive term. Anusim is the term that we use in Hebrew. The Abarbanel, however, because his financial acumen was so necessary, he was given an exemption. Ferdinand basically said, hey, you can be frum, you can wear tefillin, you can do mitzvot, I need you for your monetary skills. The Abarbanel, however, refused to accept that offer. And the last major expulsion, which traditionally we often say it was on Tisha B'Av, again, the history doesn't quite match up. The idea that the final expulsion, first of all, there was not a single expulsion. Jews left in a number of waves. But what is often said to be the final expulsion on 1492 was said to be on Tisha B'Av. Again, historically there are some difficulties, but that is kind of a tradition in Jewish history. And just a little sense of that procession. The head of the procession was the Abarbanel, who was the elder of the Jewish community. In the back of the procession, there was a widowed woman with her 4-year-old child. And that 4-year-old child grew up to be Rav Yosef Karo, the author of the Shulchan Aruch, who first went to Turkey, and from Turkey came to Eretz Yisrael, came to Tzvat. So imagine a very interesting procession. Abarbanel is towards the end of his life. Rav Yosef Karo is still a little child. There's also a tradition that the Abarbanel gave a psak that although thousands of Jews were leaving on the 9th of Av, so says the tradition, he ordered the procession to play musical instruments in a very joyous way, which of course is a great violation of halacha. And there are two interesting justifications given for this heter, which almost go in opposite directions. Reason number one is that the Jewish spirit, they were so broken, they were so heartbroken, they were so demoralized, that it was a matter of spiritual pikuach nefesh. If their spirit would have totally died, they could never reconstitute. So they needed this simcha as a special emergency dispensation. An analogy would be an avelis. I mean, I'm not giving you a psak in this. Each person has to ask an individual shaila. But an avel, for parents, generally does not listen to music for an entire year. But sometimes a person might be very prone to depression, to sadness. So in fact, there are heterim that an avel can listen to music, at least with headphones and the like, if they are suffering kind of an unusually strong sadness. So this was very similar. But the other explanation is even more interesting. The other explanation was that the Jews were so heartbroken that they were leaving Spain. The lesson of the music is, hey, you're just leaving one gullus to go into another gullus. Spain is not Yerushalayim. Spain is not your real home. Spain is not where you're supposed to be anyway. So you need to understand that going from gullus to gullus is no big tragedy. It doesn't mean that much in the long picture. And therefore, they played music to de-emphasize the idea that this is such a traumatic event. It doesn't have to be so traumatic. Gullus is gullus. In fact, they tell a cute story. When the Vilna Gaon was 6 years old, so I think his father asked him a question, both Sukkot and Pesach are on the 15th of the month. Sukkot is 15 of Tishrei, Pesach is 15 of Nisan. How come on Pesach you say Manishtana? Why are things so different? And on Sukkot there's no Manishtana. You can have a Manishtana on Sukkot too. Manishtana, Laila Zeh, we go into the Sukkah. So the Vilna Gaon answered when he was only 6 years old. He said, listen, when a Jew is kicked out of his house and he has to go into a hut and wander from place to place, nothing unusual with that. That's Jewish history. But Pesach, fancy dishes, china, we sit like kings, we recline like we're free people. Manishtana, that is different. So to simply get kicked out of your place and wander from home to home, that's lo shinoi. That's normally. Okay. So the Abarbanel, when he left Spain, he first went to Italy, Portugal, Italy. He wrote his great commentaries on the Chumash. Not just on Chumash. He wrote commentaries on Chumash, on virtually, I think, all of the Sifrei Nevi'im. He did not write on Kesuvim except for Sefer Daniel. The Abarbanel was fascinated with Mashiach. So he does write on the book of, in fact he has 3 Perushim on the book of Daniel and some Sfarim on Mashiach in general, because Daniel has many Messianic indicators and the like. Now the Abarbanel's derech of Parshanut is very interesting, because what he does is he takes a parak of Chumash or a Parsha and he will ask many questions. He may ask up to 100 questions and then give an explanation that answers all of these questions. So they tell the story about the dangers that this approach has, about someone who loved to learn the Abarbanel Shabbos afternoon after Cholent. So he had his Cholent, and he would sit in his easy chair, and he would read the Abarbanel, and you know what happens after you eat Cholent, you're falling asleep. So as a result, he read the 100 questions, but never got to the answers. So he became an apikoros. He says, the Torah has so many questions, contradictions, inconsistencies, things don't make sense, they're not in the right place. I can't believe in this Torah. Too many things are wrong. So there's always a risk in asking too many questions before you have answers. Okay. Another great strength of the Abarbanel's commentary is that he is like a shita mekubetzet. By that I mean that before he gives his explanation, he summarizes the predecessor explanations, whether it be Rashi or Ramban or Ibn Ezra or the Ran. He even brings Karaite interpretations of the Chumash, and he even brings Christian interpretations of the Chumash, usually to dispute them and sometimes to accept them. In fact, as an aside, I'm digressing a little bit, there's a story that's brought, my own feeling is it's a Baba Maisa, but it's brought down as a true story, that the great Rav Hai Gaon, the greatest of the Gaonim, his yeshiva was located across the street from a monastery. And one time they're learning some psukim in Tanakh, and Rav Hai Gaon had some problem, so he told one of his Talmidim, go across the street and ask them how they understand this verse. And let's go and ask the monks. So the student was like frozen in place. He didn't, he just didn't respond. And Rav Hai Gaon said, what's the matter? Did you hear me? I said, go across the street. He says, across the street. He says, why, you think we can't learn from anybody? The Chazal say, Kabel ha'emet mimi shamro. Right, so the story goes that Rav Hai Gaon himself said, go and ask the Christians how they interpret this verse, because it's true that when they interpret verses referring to Yashka, we say that that's incorrect and we have our own interpretation, but in matters of linguistics, in matters of language, they could very well have some type of understanding. So the Abarbanel himself does not hesitate to even quote Christian sources. Okay, all of that is just by way of general introduction. But going back to the Inyan here is the problem. The Abarbanel brings the Ramban, and the Ramban is the one that says Yosef's behavior was to be megashem, to concretize his chalom. Abarbanel says, frankly, that's none of Yosef's business. A dream, even if it is a prophecy, even if it comes from God, and a lot of times we don't even know that, is not a commandment. God did not tell Yosef, thou shalt make yourself a king. God is simply telling Yosef how Yosef's life will eventually unfold. But it's not up to Yosef to manipulate reality by hurting people, particularly innocent people, because he has to fulfill his dream. That gives him the right to hurt Yaakov and hurt Binyamin and engage in lying and misrepresentation. Isn't this a classic example of the ends not justifying the means? You have a dream, so it's God's responsibility to make it happen. It's not your responsibility. So to say that Yosef can manipulate reality because he's supposed to be a melech, that's up to Hashem. That's not up to Yosef. So because of this, the Abarbanel offers an alternative interpretation to explain Yosef's behavior, and that is, Yosef wants to guarantee that his brothers have done tshuva. Because again, the Torah tells us at the very beginning of the story of Mechiras Yosef that Yaakov showed great favoritism to Yosef by making him a special coat, and obviously the favoritism derived from the fact that Rachel was Yaakov's more beloved wife, however we understand this. I mean, the Torah uses words that are frankly inconceivable to be taken in a literal way. Leah describes herself as senua. Leah literally more than once describes herself as a hated woman, a rejected woman, a despised woman. Again, Chazal never take that in as literal a way as that word suggests. And Chazal always go with the approach that senua is a relative term vis-a-vis the love that Yaakov had for Rachel. And keep in mind that ultimately it is Leah that is buried next to Yaakov in Marat HaMachpelah. It is Leah that is the mother of 6 tribes of Am Yisrael. It is Leah that is the mother of the tribe of Shevet Yehuda, which is David HaMelech and Mashiach, and the tribe of Kohanim and Leviim, from which Moshe, Aaron, and really all the Kohanim and Leviim come from. So Leah's role in Klal Yisrael is obviously very, very, very significant. And it would not be that conceivable that this could come out, such holiness can come out of a hated relationship. Nevertheless, the Torah does say over and over again that Yaakov loved Rachel more. And he worked 7 years for Rachel, he got deceived, and then he had to work another 7 years. Although he married he married Rachel just a week later, but he had to work another 7 years. So the shirish of the brothers' hatred to Yosef was based on jealousy for the favored position that Rachel and therefore her children had over Leah and her children. Yosef wanted to determine whether his brothers have successfully eradicated that character flaw from their heart. Now there's only one remaining child of Rachel other than Yosef himself, and that is Binyamin. So Yosef wants to engage in an experiment. He wants Binyamin to be brought down. He wants to frame Binyamin, and he wants to see how the brothers who hated Yosef are now going to react. If they still have jealousy and hatred towards the favoritism that Yaakov shows towards Bnei Rachel, they might very well say, well, okay, listen, good riddance. Let's get rid of this last child of Rachel, and we'll just tell our father that, what could we do? This dictator in Egypt was crazy, and he did what he did. Or they could even say, Binyamin was a ganef. They could even turn their father against Binyamin by saying that Binyamin was arrested because Binyamin committed a serious crime. Instead, what happened was that Yehuda, who is the leader of the brothers, steps forward and really offers himself and his other brothers to be slaves, either in place of Binyamin or along with Binyamin. So the Abarbanel says, the purpose of Yosef's behavior was not to carry out his dream. That was the responsibility of the Almighty. The purpose of Yosef's behavior was to ensure that his brothers had overcome the jealousy and animosity they had for Bnei Rachel, and they could now embrace an ethic of love, and Yosef would not reveal himself to his brothers until he was sure that they had done that tshuva. So according to the Abarbanel, Yosef's mission was completed, meaning the Ramban understood that Yosef revealed himself prematurely because Yosef was expecting to get Yaakov down to beg. According to Abarbanel, Yosef revealed himself exactly at the point he wanted to reveal himself, when the brothers demonstrated a selfless love for Bnei Rachel, for Binyamin. But here is the thing. Could we not ask on the Abarbanel the very same question the Abarbanel asks on the Ramban? The Abarbanel asks on the Ramban, why is it Yosef's business to make sure that his dream gets carried out? That's up to God. Well, here we have a parallel question. Yes, there are 10 people who did something very bad to Yosef, and they have to do tshuva. But in Yosef's desire to make sure they do tshuva, is he allowed to hurt innocent people? Is he allowed to hurt Yaakov? Is he allowed to hurt Binyamin? In other words, Yosef's basically saying, I'm going to, hurt Binyamin unless you guys stand up for him. You're back to the same problem. 10 people need to do tshuva. Well, that's between them and God. And Yosef cannot engage in wrongful, cruel behavior in order to manipulate his brothers in doing tshuva. It's almost like what Chazal call mitzvah haba ba'avera. You do a mitzvah by the commission of a sin. No, that's not really a mitzvah. So why is the Abarbanel's solution any better than the Ramban's solution? So here is the additional point I want to superimpose on the Ramban. And that is, if the tshuva of the brothers was simply the tshuva of 10 individual people that did something bad, then indeed it would not have been in Yosef's purview to do wrong things in order to get them to do tshuva. But this has a much more cosmic application, and that is the following. Yosef is pondering the extraordinary nature of his life, the miraculous nature of his life, in which he was a person who was sold into slavery by brothers who hated him. And he languished in Egypt for many years, both as a slave and then in prison. And somehow, by a combination of the most unlikely of circumstances, he becomes the most powerful person in Egypt, perhaps in some ways even more powerful than Paro, because Yosef was making the decisions, although officially he was under Paro. How did it happen? What's the tafkid? What's the purpose? And one has to think about this, just as, for example, the Panovich Rav. Take another example. The Panovich Rav was the only one of 800 Lithuanian city Rabbanim who survived the Holocaust. 799 of them died. The Panovich Rav was obsessed with the question, why is he alive? Why did he make it if so many great and righteous people didn't make it? And he understood that if God gave him life, there must be some extraordinary mission that Hashem had for him. And he became one of the greatest builders of Torah of the 20th century. Not just the Panovich Yeshiva was the largest thing that he created, but he created hospitals, orphanages, Chadarim, Beis Yaakovs, a builder of Torah, Chesed institutions of all types. In fact, the Satmar Rebbe once remarked about the Panovich Rav, after the first moon landing, I think it was in 1968, so people were discussing, could there be life on other planets? Could there be life on the moon? Could there be life on other planets? So the Satmar Rav said, I'm not a scientist, I don't know all the science, but I am absolutely convinced there cannot be life on other planets, because if there were, the Panovich Rav would have been there collecting money. So either there's no life or there's no money. Maybe there's life, they don't have money up there. He would have gotten there no matter what. So the concept is, and many people who survived the Holocaust often have that feeling. They ask themselves, why am I alive? Well, going back to Yosef, how did he get here? Why is he here? His life is not an ordinary life. It's an amazing life. It's a supernatural life. It doesn't make sense. So Yosef came to the following conclusion. God told Abraham that his descendants are going to be enslaved in a land that is not theirs. Yosef either knows or he intuits that this is probably it. This is probably going to be, after my death or at some point in the near future, the beginning of a long and difficult experience for Am Yisrael. And we know that the experience of being slaves in Egypt almost destroyed us. We were slaves for not slaves, we were in Mitzrayim for 210 years. We were not slaves the whole time, because we're counting from the time that Yaakov came, and slavery didn't begin till all of the Shvatim died. But be it as it may, our stay in Mitzrayim was 210 years. During that time, 4/5 of the Jewish people died. Only 1/5 survived. Of that 1/5, we are told, they had reached the 49th level of impurity. Whatever that means, b'diyuk. There are only 50 levels. When you hit level 50, you are irredeemable. You've reached the point of no return. We were on, when I say we, I mean the 1/5 that survived. The 4/5 hit the level 50. They're gone. The 1/5 that survived were on the 49th level of Tumah. When the Torah says, when they left, they didn't have time to let their dough rise and be baked as bread. And they had to bake it as matzah. The Arizal, it's not a Chazal, the Arizal says, it doesn't just mean Paro was telling them to leave, which is how many commentators understand it. Rather, spiritually, they had to leave exactly at that moment. Because if they would have stayed, the small number of minutes that it takes for dough to become chametz, which as a maximum is 18 minutes, they would have hit level 50. We don't know what that means. What does it mean to say, if you stay another 10 minutes, you're going to hit level 50? But that is how precarious we were. So, Yosef, and of course, Chazal tell us, all of the Jewish people except the tribe of Levi were Ovdei Avodah Zarah. All of the Jewish people except for the tribe of Levi did not practice bris milah. It's only when Hashem gave us the Korban Pesach and was going to take us out that He gave us that mitzvah. So Yosef understands that his divine mission is to give us the tools to survive, to keep our head above the water so we totally do not disappear. This is why he's there. In a more generic sense, what's going on is that Yosef exemplifies how to survive in Galus at the two extremities. Because a Jew in Galut faces two challenges. We face challenges of persecution and enslavement when people want to kill us or despise us or treat us in a very, very bad way. Yosef was a slave. He was languishing in prison. But then there's another Nisayon, the Nisayon of greatness, of leadership. That can corrupt a person even more. Yosef is Yosef at both extremes. At the nadir, he sank as low as you can be, and he rose at the zenith as high as you can be. So generically, Yosef exemplifies how to survive in Golos. And by the way, I want to point out, there are midrashim that actually say that many Jews were doing quite well as slaves. In other words, there were different levels of slaves. There were slaves who were actually independently wealthy. It reminds me a little bit, I remember years ago, I spent around 2 weeks for Sameach in South Africa. So right outside of Johannesburg is a famous black suburb, a huge black suburb, Soweto. And Soweto is full of shacks. It's really a slum. It's a big slum. But sometimes you'll see in the middle of Soweto, you'll actually see some big mansions in the middle of a slum. That there were people who lived in Soweto who happened to be, they got wealthy. I don't know if it's through drugs or whatever it was. I don't know exactly how they got wealthy. But it's so incongruous that in the middle of this really garbagey slum, you have big mansions. So the Medrash actually says there were Jews, I guess Jews have a good business sense, whatever it is, there were Jews who managed to make it even in Mitzrayim. So in a sense, even in Mitzrayim, we face the nisayon of leadership, of elevation, and the nisayon of oppression. But be it as it may, this is Yosef's mission. Now, there's a famous chazal that comes in different versions. If the Jewish people were so low on the 49th level of Tumah, what were the zechuyot that enabled them to survive? What kept their nose above the water? What kept them a tiny bit beyond the point of no return? And the Medrash, the Gemara, says there were a number of factors. They didn't change their names. They kept their Jewish names. They didn't change their language. They continued to converse in Lashon HaKodesh. And then there's another version that says they didn't change their clothing, but according to the Mechilta, it says they didn't intermarry with non-Jewish spouses and were faithful to their wives. And the fourth is they didn't speak Lashon Hara against each other. Now I want to explain for a moment that last one, because a lot of people ask a question. If you remember, when Moshe killed the Egyptian that was beating the Jew, and the next day he sees two Jews are fighting, and he says to the one who raised your fist, Russia, you're a Russia, why are you hitting your friends? So the person, this is Dasan and Haviram, says to Moshe, are you going to kill me the way you killed the Egyptian? Who made you the boss? Are you going to kill me the way you killed the Egyptian? And Moshe said, Ochein, Nodah Hadavar, the matter is known. And that is why Moshe left Mitzrayim and he fled to Midian. Rashi says that when Moshe said, "Achein no da'adavar," he says, now I see among these people there's lashon hara, and that's why they're not deserving to be redeemed, and that's why I'm leaving. So people ask Akasha, the Mechilta says they didn't speak lashon hara. Moshe Rabbeinu B'dafka says they did speak lashon hara. But the answer is it's really not a question if you think about it. Because when it says they didn't speak lashon hara, it doesn't mean they were learning a paragraph of Chafetz Chaim every day and they keep the laws of lashon hara. Rather, this was a matter of group solidarity. We know that in extreme times, including the Holocaust, for example, superimposed on the tragedy of 6 million Jews being killed is the tragedy that sometimes Jews collaborated with the Nazis because they thought, usually it didn't work for them either, but they thought they could get some extra food for their family or something better. What the Torah is telling me is no Jew turned against another Jew, fellow slave, in order to get advantages. They had a united front. Even Dasan v'Aviram, the proverbial bad guys in the desert. First of all, note that they made the 1/5 cut. That itself says something good about them. Number two, Dasan v'Aviram were taskmasters, and they had to report on whether the slaves met their quotas, and if there were slaves who didn't meet their quotas, they would never give that slave's name. They took the beatings. In fact, I would suggest, this is a psychological interpretation, I've not seen it anywhere, that part of why Dasan v'Aviram are always causing trouble in the desert is, again, this may sound like a funny thing to say, they just didn't like Moshe. Because look at it this way. They're taskmasters. They're getting beaten every day. Now here is this guy Moshe. Now they knew Moshe was Jewish because he would come out and talk to the slaves. He talks to the slaves and gives them chizuk. And then he goes back into the palace. And then he becomes the big shot. Again, he becomes the leader. What about us? It's a bit of an unusual way to understand the personalities, but I actually think, Libi Omerli, that is actually 100% correct. Because if you're a person who suffered in the trenches, and you sacrificed, and you were beaten, and then comes this person who lived in comfort in the palace, and all of a sudden God makes him the leader, you're going to resent it very much, from a human perspective. So, when it says they didn't speak Lashon Hara, they had no problem speaking Lashon Hara about Moshe. Moshe they looked at as a quasi-traitor. But they didn't speak Lashon Hara about their fellow slaves. That's how you reconcile the contradiction. So, once again, what are the 4 merits that kept us above the water? We didn't change our names. We didn't change our language. We didn't intermarry. We didn't badmouth each other to get advantage. By the way, people say we like to look at the Jews in Mitzrayim and say, oh, they were so bad. They were in the 49th level of Tumah. Well, let's ask ourselves, typical Jewry today, how many of those 4 does Klal Yisrael keep? Jewish names, speak Jewish language, don't intermarry, don't disparage other Jews. We have to ask ourselves if we've hit level 50. Now, you may say, well, obviously we haven't hit level 50 because we're redeemable. So I'll tell you this. Rav Chaim Volozhiner says in the Nefesh HaChaim that the rule that once you hit level 50 you're not redeemable is only before the Torah was given. Once the Torah was given, that can take you even out of the 50th level. Now that's good news, but it's also bad news in a sense. It's good news that says no matter how far you are, Torah brings you back. But the bad news is that perhaps we are on level 50, but Baruch Hashem, Afal Pichein, we have the Torah to help us. Meaning, we shouldn't look down at the Jews in Egypt and say we're better than them. We might be a lot worse than them, because we don't even have many people don't even have the 4 Zechuyot. Okay. But let's think about the 4 Zechuyot a little bit. They didn't change their names. They didn't change their language. I mean, you can go to Tel Aviv, I mean, even in Jerusalem, you go to a bar, go to a discotheque, and you'll find, huh? No, I'm not saying to do it. And you'll certainly find, Hebrew-speaking Israelis that have Hebrew names, hopefully not like Nimrod or something, but someone that has Avi, a real Rafi, a real Hebrew name, and maybe they'll even wear a Magen David. Is this something? I mean, that means something. I mean, no Torah, no mitzvahs, no emunah in Hashem because they were over there avodah zarah. Doesn't mean anything. The answer is, it does mean something, because it means you identify yourself as a member of the Jewish people. And that is not the purpose of redemption. The purpose of redemption was to bring us to Matan Torah. But the root of redemption, the start of the process, requires that you identify yourself. This is my nation. These are my people. I want to share a language with them. I want to share a name with them. These are the people I want to create my family with. These are the people that I don't betray, even if it may be a short-term advantage for me. And when you identify yourself as a Jew, that is the beginning of the possibilities of redemption. I'm sure many of you have had this experience, again, not so much in Israel where the airport is filled with Jews, but let's say you're in Kennedy Airport or whatever. So if you're conspicuously Orthodox, so what's often going to happen is somebody will come out of the woodwork. Maybe it'd be an airport worker, maybe it'll be just another person who does not look like a religious Jew, does not look like a Jew in particular, and will kind of almost whisper, a conspiratorial whisper, I'm Jewish too. Or they like to say, I'm a member of the tribe. Now, I personally don't like it because it's usually intruding, but I wish I liked it because I should like it. Because it's a good thing. That person is basically saying, I don't know what it is, what you're doing. I don't know what those black boxes on your head are. I don't know what those strings coming out of your pocket is. But I want you to know, I'm with you. I'm on your team. We're one people. And that's a very, very beautiful thing. And it's something that we should welcome, because we are one people. That was what enabled us. Now again, it didn't keep us from hitting the 49th level, because if that's all you have, you can still sink pretty low. But it keeps you from hitting the 50th level. And if you don't hit the 50th level, everything is possible. Everything is possible from that point. Jewish identification. I may have told you the story before, forgive me, because I speak in different places, so I forget. When I lived in Chicago, so in Devon Avenue, there was a Jewish street, Devon Avenue. Now it's largely Indian, although there's still a Jewish presence. But when I lived in Chicago, Devon Avenue was a totally Jewish street. All sorts of restaurants and Jewish bookstores and all sorts of things like that. So I remember there was a kosher-style restaurant. That means treif. A non-kosher, kosher-style restaurant called The Bagel. And I remember walking by on Shabbos, and I saw a sign in the window of The Bagel that said, we give a free glass of wine for every order of cholent on Saturday. So I was thinking to myself, like, what type of person is going to take advantage of that offer? He comes into a treif restaurant, he orders treif cholent, has probably treif wine unless it's mabushal and the like, pays money, because he remembers that his grandmother, made some bean stew called cholent, and the Zaidi, or grandfather, made some blessing over a cup of wine. And I said to myself, this is American Jewry, superficial, gastronomic, sentimental, having nothing to do with Torah, nothing to do with mitzvahs, nothing to do with serving Hashem. And I said, superficial, stupid, meaningless. As I got older, hopefully wiser, I began to think that this was exactly the situation of the Jews in Mitzrayim. They were idol worshippers. That means they didn't believe in one God. They weren't keeping commandments. But The person who walks by and sees an advertisement for cholent and wine on Shabbos Saturday, he's basically saying, I don't really know what Shabbos is about. I don't know how to connect. But I remember my grandparents, and I remember these Jewish traditions. And I want to be part of it. I want to do something. It means very, very much. It may not take you beyond the 49th level of Tumah, but once again, if you're not hitting 50, you are a redeemable person. And that's something we should treasure and something we should cherish. Even the superficial manifestations of Jewish identity can be very, very profound. And they shouldn't be ridiculed. They do mean something, because they can lead to something much better and much deeper. Without it, not. In Or Sameach, I'll give you an example. In Or Sameach, we have these several times a year. We have visiting groups of college students who come, and most of them are not religious, but they come because they're proud to be Jewish, right? And this is a manifestation of Jewish pride, and you can work with that. So there was one case, I hate to call people people are not cases, but there was one young man that he was literally being passed from rabbi to rabbi. They finally came to me. They thought I could, be the great one who could solve this problem. And I was frankly very stymied. And this person, I don't know why he came at all. This person basically said, I don't understand why Jews have their own get-togethers. Why can't you just be part of general society? What type of racist thing is that you Jews get together? I mean, he's Jewish. And you have your own separate meals and the like. In other words, he was missing, and I hope he would get it somewhere. He was missing something that is kind of more or less almost intuitive in most Jews. And that is a sense of pride in being Jewish. I don't mean pride in putting other people down. That is not what I mean at all. I mean just the pride of being a Jew. Like, I'm used to the guy saying, well, I don't believe in the Torah, but I am proud to be a Jew. We can work with that. But somebody who says, why do Jews even get together? Like, what's the point? You really, there's nothing to grab onto there. Very, very, very difficult case. And I hope that somehow he would discover that. And that is the shirish of what happened in Mitzrayim. So now let's go back to Yosef and the Abarbanel. If Yosef understands that his role is to give us the survival mechanism to endure the Galut Mitzrayim, and that survival mechanism is a sense of unity, togetherness, caring for each other, then Yosef cannot allow, like the Galut begins when Yaakov comes down and Yosef reveals himself. Yosef cannot give the green light for the Galus to begin until he determines that the refuah, the healing, is there before the makkah. So the question is this: if the idea of the brothers doing tshuva would simply be an individual question of 10 people repenting, that's not Yosef's business. But if Yosef understands that the mission of his improbable life is to give us the mechanism to survive Galut Mitzrayim, then Yosef has to be absolutely certain that the brothers have overcome the hatred, the animosity, and the jealousy. Because if they haven't, then they're going to sink eventually to level 50 and become irredeemable. So this is a cosmic process. This is not just an individual prati issue with 10 people who have to do tshuva. This is setting the foundation for what will let us survive in Mitzrayim. The sense of achdus, unity, togetherness, caring, even if they're of the avodah zarah, even if they're so far from serving Hashem. But the sense of being a nation can give them an ability to be redeemed. It'll keep them above the 50th level. So with this, let me go back at the very end here to the very first question I raised. The very first question I raised was, Why did Yosef say, don't take me back until you are redeemed? Meaning Yosef did not say like Yaakov, bury me right away. Yosef said, when you are redeemed, take my bones. Number one, Yosef needed to kind of be almost a physical presence in Egypt. So the Jews would be reminded of the lesson that he imparted to them. He needed to be there, and moreover, what Yosef is saying is, my message to you is, we are one. I'm not going to go back to Israel, Eretz Israel, when you're here. If you're here, I'm going to be here, dead or alive. Because the whole idea is, I am with you. We are one. We're not going to have part of Am Yisrael going back, even as a dead body, and part of Am Yisrael staying. And therefore, part of Yosef's Achdus message is, we stay. We're all in it together. Was it either Thomas Paine, an American patriot, or Benjamin Franklin, who remarked, I don't remember which one said it, I'll check it, we must all hang together, for otherwise we will surely hang separately. And that indeed is the ultimate message here. It's an interesting irony that it's precisely Yosef's descendants, the Bnei Ephraim, who left Mitzrayim on their own 30 years early, and they got killed. It's a little fascinating. It kind of it's a bit of a question on this whole approach, that if Yosef is the great exemplar of unity, then it would be strange that Yosef's own children didn't, or descendants, didn't take that lesson, and they left on their own. But okay, that's kids don't always follow the guidance of their parents. We know that as parents and as kids. So it's not necessarily such a question. But okay, so this could be the explanation. Again, although this is largely about Breitowitz, but it really kind of explains how Yosef lay the foundation for what enabled us to survive the Golus of Mitzrayim. So you'll have a good week, and take care.